that these guys have been on a serious, over trend. Basically, the last couple fights that they've been having, these are two welterweights, right? So typically in the welterweight division, we're thinking we're ending over 50% of the time inside the distance. But that hasn't been the case for these guys. There's been some finishes, of course, but they've been round 5 finishes when they have materialized. I'm obviously talking about the Kamaru Usman finish against Colby Covington, but also that Leon Edwards finish against Kamaru Usman. Both of those took place in the 5th round. So these guys have been starting round 5 every time out in their recent bouts. I was thinking maybe we could be due for some regression in this bout. Maybe when you've got 270-pound fighters, there could be a chance that this fight finishes at a higher rate. And so I did notice that, it's heavily chalked to go the distance, heavily chalked to go over in this spot. And I always wonder to myself, are we due for some regression? But in any case, we're looking at two guys here that both have, different styles of fighting, right? Leon Edwards is a lot more technical, a lot more cold, a lot more calculated. He's a guy that goes out there and picks his shots, and he's very particular. I think he's a sophisticated fighter. I think sometimes people don't give him enough credit for the things that he does technically to prevent people from dominating him. He got beat by Kamaru Usman way back in the day, the first time they fought. Some people don't realize it's a trilogy between these men. They fought way back in the day. Leon took the L there. He went on a long win streak, then got back to that rematch with Kamaru Usman where he head kicked him. And then obviously they had the trilogy bout earlier this year where he was able to get that, closing of the book with the rivalry. And he was able to get the win there 2-1 in that series career over Kamaru Usman. Now, on the other side of things here, we've got a guy in in Colby Covington, who's going to be a pressure wrestler, right? This is a guy who was an All-American at the Division I level in college. And we've seen that he's had a lot of success in the UFC, but he's been very inactive in recent years. We've seen that Colby Covington has taken a real tick down in this level of competition, but it's obvious why. He was waiting for a title opportunity. It seems like he had some assurances from the company that he was going to get said title opportunity if he waited. So he's waited. He's sat on a couple of wins, but he's also done favors for the company at times along the way, stepping up to take some fights and also headlining pay-per-views when he was not in championship settings. So I think of a guy like Colby Covington as a attraction for fans. I think of him as a guy that can, go out there and do some media, get some attention, positive or negative. The UFC is happy to get all the attention that they can get. And I think of Leon Edwards as a guy who needs a foil. He needs somebody that's going to sell the fight. One of the things that was kind of noteworthy about the Kamaru Usman and Leon Edwards fight was that there wasn't a tremendous build to it. What made it such a big fight was that Leon was able to get the upset. Leading into that first fight, I don't think there was quite as much hype. But leading into the fight in England, I think the fight sold itself. It was, the ultimate resolution of a long-term conflict between two of the all-time, welterweights of their era, right? And when I'm looking at Colby Covington, he's really trying to stake his claim among them. He's a guy that's come short in these title opportunities before. He's a guy that's stepped up at this level many times, and he's beaten UFC champions. He absolutely dusted Tyron Woodley when they finally got in there. But you can poke holes at times in the resume of Colby Covington because he got a couple guys past their prime. You could do a little bit of the same to Leon Edwards when he fought Bilal Muhammad. The fight doesn't come to a natural conclusion, right? It's a no contest. And that is actually what breaks up his fight starts round 5 streak. Since Leon Edwards been in 5-round fights, the only one that did not start round 5 is that one with Bilal Muhammad that ended in a no contest. So just looking at this guy, I think that we've seen growth in the game of Leon Edwards over time. We see that he works with solid training partners in England, but archetypally, it's not an easy thing to do to go, transition your game to defend against an American style wrestler whose game is pressure, whose game is persistent volume takedowns over the duration of a bout. Now, some of the questions that I have coming into this bout, can Colby Covington sustain the same pace? We got to be realistic about the fact that he's going to be almost 36 years of age coming into this spot. We know historically he's had great cardio. However, whose cardio broke in the first Kamaru Usman fight? I actually feel like Colby Covington, mostly because of damage, was the one who slowed down in that instance. I think that when you look at a guy like Colby Covington, he could push an extensive 5-round pace, but even the Masvidal fight had some moments of doubt, a little bit of moments of, intrigue on the feet, let's say, where Masvidal was able to create some damaging moments and back Colby up. But Masvidal himself was so fatigued that he was unable to follow up. I think one of the things that we noticed about Leon Edwards is that even when he was exhausted, he was fighting at altitude. He was fighting in Salt Lake City, Utah. He had been dominated. He won the first round, obviously, in the rematch with Kamaru, but then he had been dominated for multiple rounds in a row. 2, 3, 4 rounds of just getting taken down against the fence, dominated in some of those positions, and really made to work at a high rate. The one thing that we know about Kamaru and Colby based on their dynamic, Kamaru was stronger than Colby. I do think that that was clear in the fights that they had. I think it's the reason why Colby showed a lot of respect to Kamaru's wrestling and didn't try to wrestle with him. He tried to strike with Kamaru instead because Colby realized, man, this guy's really strong. I shouldn't try and wrestle with him. I think we saw Leon Edwards is strong as shit because he was able to take down Kamaru Usman in that first round. Colby fought him. He wasn't able to take him down, right? But Leon, I think the element of surprise and that strength, that physicality, the size of his body, he was able to get to that body lock and trip Kamaru down to the ground. You see that Leon is very diligent about his positioning. Oftentimes, when he's caught in a clinch against the fence, he is looking to his corner. Same thing happens when he goes down to the ground. I think that there's a moment of hesitation for Leon where he gets put in these bad spots, but then he can be coached through it very quickly and react against guys that are high level. Because we saw Kamaru take him down, big takedown, elusive shot, gets in on a single leg, snap down, crackdown position. He had multiple ways to finish. And so there were times he even got one where he snatches a single leg, runs the pipe. Leon never saw it coming, sits him right to his butt. But what we saw was Leon did such a good job. If you guys notice, it's a constant refrain in that fight that he has with Usman, where he's taking the C grip to the wrist of Usman across his own body. And he was just preventing Kamaru from getting two hands locked together. In wrestling, in traditional American style wrestling, the kind that you do in high school, you can't lock your hands together, right? Because it's such an advantage. If I was able to lock my hands, I'd be able to hold down most people. And so when you're a wrestler, you want to get to that Khabib style position. You want to lock your hands. Same thing if you look at the visuals of Bryce Mitchell taking down Dan Ige. How's he able to lift up a guy so strong and, with such a level of resistance? Well, it's easy. He had his hands locked. When you have your hands locked, you could be really strong. And what we saw from Leon in that Kamaru fight, especially the trilogy match, that third fight in England, he did a very good job preventing Kamaru from getting two hands locked together. And I think that that was the biggest difference maker for Leon. Here's the other thing. I think Leon is a very smart guy. I think he's a very diligent preparer for fights. I think that what we're going to see from Leon is a guy that shows up in incredible shape. I think he understands the assignment here in Colby Covington. And I think that he's going to try and make sure that he's crossed all his T's and dotted all his I's in terms of the wrestling and the grappling defense here. What I think about Colby Covington is very impressive is his ability to recover in grappling situations. There's many times where people have gotten him in bad spots in grappling situations. But what we've always seen from Colby, and I think that this is something I found in my own experience grappling, is that when you come from a wrestling background, there's times when you can just make it a wrestling match again out of nowhere, where there were times in that fight where Colby ended up in a bad position against Masvidal, where Masvidal's like trying to, get into a knee on belly position, and he's trying to pass the guard, and he's trying to lock up a choke, and then all of a sudden Colby bucks him off and rolls, and he's on a single leg, and then he's back on top. And there were so many times in the fight where he was able to make that happen. And I think that that's Colby's gift. Colby has an ability to extend wrestling exchanges, to make people continue to wrestle him when they don't want to tire them out in some of those exchanges. and also to do damage while they're in compromised positions. Unlike a lot of wrestlers, I think what stands out about Colby Covington is his willingness to throw ground and pound, to throw strikes, to try and get off on volume, to make sure that the referees and the judges understand that he is out there to fight and not just out there to wrestle. And I do think that that has helped him in terms of the judges' scorecards and other things throughout the course of his career. But when I look at a Leon Edwards, I do think he's going to be prepared for a lot of what Colby brings to the table. So it's incumbent on Colby to be able to compete on the feet in this fight, to be able to make Leon work at a pace rate that he's not comfortable with, and to make sure that his cardio is solid to go for the full 25 minutes, because Leon, for better or for worse, has been the much more active guy of late. He's been the guy getting in there and getting tested. And I think that at times in the past, the biggest Achilles heel for Leon Edwards has been a lack of focus in big moments and big opportunities. Think of why the Nate Diaz fight isn't a celebrated win for Leon Edwards. It's because in the last moments of the fight, the fleeting moments, he kind of just lets the fight get away from him for a second, and Nate blasts him on the chin and puts the fighting in doubt. But he was so up on the scorecards that it's obvious Leon Edwards is a much better fighter than Nate Diaz, but he just had that moment of lapse, right? He just let that go for a second. And I think that when I'm looking at Leon Edwards, I do wonder if he can maintain that composure here for the full 25 minutes. Because if he can, I think he's going to be an absolute handful for Colby Covington as well. Because the damage that Leon's able to do is significant when he gets off on his shots. He's very accurate with his strikes that he chooses to throw. We saw that last time out against Usman. He was very precise with the shots that he threw. And he also can dice you at every level of the body with his strikes. We've seen Leon Edwards land massive low kicks that hurt people, that get people off balance, that affect the way that they stand. And we've also seen him go to the body against Usman and get him uncomfortable several times in all their fights, really, by mixing up those body kicks. And then the body kick opens up the head kick. And that head kick is what closed the show against Kamaru Usman. It's what got him his big finish. We've also seen Leon one time in the past in the UFC get a big finish with the hands as well, a rapid, fast knockout with his hands. He's got good hand speed when he commits to his combination. So I think this is a great fight. I think it's a great classic style clash, but the younger guy in this spot is Leon Edwards by a pretty considerable margin. He is the bigger welterweight in this spot by a few inches in terms of height, in terms of reach. So I think that he's got a lot of things going for him in terms of things that are working against him here. He's got to fly over to Vegas, right? I do think that there's a decent chance that it could be a pro Colby Covington crowd in Las Vegas. But, I think there's a lot up for grabs in this spot. And Leon Edwards, for me, has been a very bankable commodity in his recent performances. He made me a ton of money. I'll always be a fan of the guy. However, when it was plus 300 against Kamaru Usman, that was one wager. But now minus 165, minus 175, whatever it is against Colby Covington, that for me is a much different wager, right? Because I think he can win this fight. I think he's the more skilled guy. But I think that even in a best case scenario, this is probably going to be a difficult fight for him where he's got to fend off a lot of takedowns, where he's got to work really hard. Nobody's really made an easy out of Colby Covington, save for Warley Alves in a fight where Colby was admittedly very injured going into that fight. So I think it's a great fight. I think it's extremely compelling matchmaking. I do think that, I get why people are taking a dog shot on Colby Covington in this spot. For me, I'm not going to be doing so, at least not right now. I'm going to let the research be my guide here. I will do the tape study a little bit more. I will confess that for most fights, I didn't do the tape study yet. For this fight, I did go back and rewatch each of their most recent fights. That's why I had some things, to note in terms of Colby Covington. Number one, was very aggressive with the submission threat in that last fight against Masvidal. Perhaps that was out of, revenge, aggression, wanting to get one over on this older roommate of his. But we did see a much more aggressive submission threat from Colby Covington in that fight. But like I said, when he got aggressive with the sub attempts, it did open up some reversals for Masvidal. And I believe Masvidal's a black belt, but frankly, if you put Masvidal and Leon Edwards out there to grapple, I would take Leon Edwards with some confidence there. I think he's stronger. I think that he could be more physical. So for me, the grappling match between these two could be very interesting. And we have seen Leon Edwards get the dominant positions on Usman, something we did not see from Colby. And I think why that was a plausible scenario is the size. So I do think that there are there's a world in which Leon Edwards takes down Colby Covington. I think that would blow people's mind, but I could really see that happening. I don't think that that's a likelihood, let's say, but I just think that that's something that we can't count out here because I do think that Leon's a physical guy. He's very good in the clinch and he lands big knees. So if he can land a big knee, get Colby to bend over a little bit and whip him over to the ground, I wouldn't be that surprised at some point. So I think it's going to be a competitive fight. I wouldn't be stunned if we needed to see the judges in this one because, like I said, both these guys have been prolific starts round 5 fighters. But I also just worry that we could see some regression here. So for me, I'm looking at potentially betting violence and hoping for the best here. But I haven't decided how I'm going to attack the main event yet. And I feel like I don't need to play this main event. I feel like I could sit back and watch with some popcorn and hopefully already have a lot of profit in my pocket by that point in the evening that I'm just sitting there enjoying the fight for what it is, which is a great matchup between two of the best welterweights on the planet. But for me, I like to bet on activity, and it is tough for me knowing that Colby's been a little inactive, but stylistically, it seems like a dog or pass situation.